smiling, you'll not find love. Only sleepless nights. I'm just a ghost of the man I was, too weary to fight.
Hey guys, welcome to Beyond the Beard podcast, a podcast dedicated to discovering true masculinity. We're excited that you joined us for this episode. We think we have a really fun discussion for you guys, or at least a thought-provoking discussion. So we hope you guys have had a good week, and we're going to dive into this. But first off, gentlemen, how has your week been?
It was good until I saw that we had a traitor amongst us.
Wow, we're diving in fast.
I'm going in. I'm going in.
That escalated quickly.
I'm not gonna back off here. Tim, what happened to your face?
Well, I got in a small fight with a razor. No,
and the razor won.
Yeah, the razor absolutely won every time. No. So funny story. So I have a 15-year-old. For those of you guys, for some context, I'm 37. And so I took him to the dentist, and the dentist, he's in his 50s. I think he just turned 50. And so, you know, he's in there getting his teeth cleaned, and they call me back, you know, to kind of talk to me about some stuff. And the dentist is like, oh, you know, how's it going? And yeah, I asked him how his summer was. He's like, oh, my summer was great. You know, I just turned 50. We went to Disneyland. And he goes, have you crossed over yet? Or are you still in your 40s? And I was like, I'm 37. He's like, oh, yeah, you know, your son's 15. And I was like, okay, so I got all like a little self-conscious, because as you guys have seen, I have a fair amount of white in my beard. And you know,
it's called chrome.
Chrome.
Okay, chrome.
I got chrome.
Okay, that's what you got.
Can it fall under drip?
Oh, don't use that.
I thought you didn't want to sound
I hear my
old
students
right
say
now.
that word, and I'm like, just every generation.
Yep.
I feel like we have to come up with some stupid word that means cool. Instead of just
Yes.
saying cool.
It's part of the passage, man. It's
Actually,
like
wasn't
you get
cool
your
one
own
of those
little
words at one
subculture.
point?
Yes. Yep.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, at least now we know what happened to your face.
Yeah. You know. So I mean, I won't let it happen again.
Wait.
Thank you.
Time out.
Yeah.
Can we buy him like a fake beard to wear, by the
That
way?
I think needs to happen. I mean, I can here. Look, I can sacrifice some of mine.
Here,
But
quickly, we
can
just
have
glue it
Mike
onto
shave
my
off,
face.
so
So you
blend
mean to
right
tell
in.
me I'm here thinking like he went to the dentist. I'm like, oh, so you had a procedure? There's going to be a thing, or like you're like, yeah, I have a 15-year-old son. I was like, oh, you're going to teach him how to shave. I'm like,
That's what I thought too. I was
These are
like,
great parenting moments.
nope.
Yep.
You
No.
shaved your beard because somebody said you looked like you were in
made
your
you
40s?
feel old.
I mean, yeah, a little bit. There was a little bit of that, guys. I mean, you know, sometimes I'm a little self-conscious. Like,
Getting old
Shame,
is a
man.
privilege.
Shame.
you're not wrong. However, when someone thinks you're 13 years older than you are, and you know, 50 is a big milestone that I don't hope to celebrate for a little while. So,
You got 13 years, man.
yeah,
That's a long time, actually.
yeah.
Doesn't feel as long when you're an adult, though. I feel like time just goes by way faster.
Well, and then when you have kids, right? Like,
Oh, yeah.
dude,
Every day,
exponentially.
man.
We all had kids young too.
Every day.
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
true.
I was going to say, dude,
Yeah, but see,
I mean,
look at you guys. Like,
you have a high
like,
schooler. You have a high schooler. I almost have a high schooler.
Oh yeah,
2 years.
Zoe did her first performance in freshman marching band.
Wow.
dang.
That's
Baller.
wild, dude.
Was that at the football game?
Yeah, there was like an alum night too thing
For
going on. So we
reference,
saw all those
Zoe was
around.
at my wedding. She wasn't born yet, but she was at my wedding.
Yeah, we were pregnant while
Which is
at
crazy,
my
dude. That's just, oh my god.
That's
That's wild.
we had dinner last night with a couple that has mentored us, done some marriage mentoring for us,
Yeah.
and the couple's son and daughter were there, and the couple's son's 37 as well, and we were talking about it, and the fact that we can now say 20 years ago, and 20 years ago we were basically almost an adult at that point.
Yep.
Like the fact that you can say 20 years ago, I was driving a car and I was graduating high school.
The number of times I've used that phrase and had that
20 years
thought.
ago.
Oh yeah, we're like, oh yeah, 20 years ago. Okay, yeah, that's 20 years
Dude,
ago.
you
Yeah.
guys have your 20th reunion coming up. Are you
Yeah,
guys,
next
is
year.
anyone even going to do anything for you guys?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Who's in charge of that for your grade? No, you can say I'm online,
Nobody
but whatever.
knows.
Anyways, yeah. All right. I mean, mine's coming up 1 year after you guys.
Yeah.
That's weird to think about. Oh my gosh.
Right
That's
around
crazy.
the corner, man.
That's crazy.
Mike, how you feeling, bud? You were a little under the weather this
Yeah,
week.
you were sick this
I've had the flu this whole week. We couldn't record last week because I was literally in bed.
Dying.
Like I was out. I got hit.
Dude, the
hard.
flu is miserable.
Yeah. I had a coworker who had COVID, and so
I had COVID.
this is the first
and
time getting COVID. I was like, yay, good job.
I was gonna say I never really had any problems with COVID. Flu knocks me out for like a week, man.
Yeah.
I feel like I got like aches.
I get like 1 to 2 weeks with.
Oh,
with
dude, the
flu.
aches
So
are
if I
worse.
can be out of the woods by like Monday, I'd be so happy. But it's not happening. I'm still a little in it.
So
Yeah.
you're still under the weather,
Mhm.
but you're here because you're a
putting the
man.
work in. That's right.
Because you're a man.
And on
Yeah.
that note,
On that note,
today's topic is kind of interesting. We have been talking about this for a while, but just this question kind of popped up. At what point do we enter manhood? Right? At what
Yeah.
point does a boy leave behind being a boy and becomes a man? And so there's many answers to that question because it depends on how we're looking at it, right?
yeah,
And so we want to kind of look at different points of view. I think I want to start off with just the most basic question. When we have this idea, when does a boy become a man? What do you think is the most obvious answer?
when he gets chest hair.
There you go. Yeah, puberty, right? Right? Yeah. So like age or look at Mike's face
I saw that differently in my head
when he gets hairy. There you go.
Yep. Yeah.
But yeah, there's I think the most obvious answer is that idea of age or puberty or, I always say it as my students, they leave 7th grade, they go on to 8th grade. And I get to see them a little bit because they're still in junior high, but I don't see them as much. I see them some, usually my lunch club, stuff like that in the hallways. But then they go to high school and they come back and they'll visit me like when they're like sophomores or juniors because I mean, they're busy. They're high school kids.
Yep.
You know anything about it. Life gets busy. And they'll come up and see me again. And I'm like, what the heck happened to you? Why are you 4 inches taller than me? And there was this one kid, man, he was short, small, and like he grew a little bit in 8th grade, but not a ton. By the time he was a senior in high school, he was the biggest offensive lineman they had. And I'm giant, dude. This kid was like an anchor, like the
That's
human
awesome.
version of an anchor. Yeah, that guy. And it was so funny just being like, I saw him and I'm like, because I hadn't seen him in like 2 years.
Yeah.
I'm like, dude, what the heck happened to you? He's like, I started lifting weights. Like, I can see. I can tell. Yeah,
Although
he's a big
probably
guy.
like, I started lifting weights.
It was more, I started lifting weights, Mr. Swanee. And I'm like, thanks, dude. It's good. Yeah. Oh, man. But I want to kind of go deeper with this question, though. So I want to start with you, Tim.
Yeah.
At one point in your life, would you say you truly entered manhood and became a man? And why?
That is such a loaded question.
Yes, it is. That's why I went with you first.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. No, it's hard to answer because I think there are so many times throughout my life where I have questioned, am I a man? Right? Am I actually a man? Because there's
if you're male, by the way. Let's
Correct.
draw that
Yeah,
line.
yeah.
Okay.
Correct. Yes, I've known for a while that I'm a guy.
Thank goodness. That's actually really hard nowadays.
Yeah,
apparently.
I know. It's I'm fairly certain at this point after 37 years of experience
37 years experience.
and 3
You
children.
just had to keep throwing that out there, didn't you?
I did. Guys, I'm 37. I'm not that old. No, it's so
That's old.
Mike, you don't have to say
That's
that.
not
I'm
old.
just
Old is a
saying.
mindset, sir.
It is.
That's all
That
it
is
is.
true.
True.
Age is a
As
number.
long as you don't think you're old, you're good.
And my mind tells me I'm not old. My body, on the other hand.
Oh, dude, the body. Yeah, well, we'll get into that.
Yeah,
but
we'll
go
get
ahead,
into that.
continue.
No. So I would say that the first time, and maybe I'll frame it like this. I think the first time that I really had maybe the understanding that I was a man was when my son was born. I think that at that moment, the realization, and really it was kind of backing up a little bit before, like when I found out I was gonna be a dad. It was, and the reason I say like that time is because that's when I feel like I fully embraced the idea of being a man, because I knew at that moment, all of a sudden there was somebody else's life that was dependent on me.
Oh.
Like at that point, to that point, I had been able to do whatever I wanted, and have lots of fun and
Yep.
and
Yep.
carefree, and the consequences were only affecting me. Everything I did really only affected me. I mean, there, of course, you have, your circle of influence or your sphere of influence, and you do impact those people. But from a consequences standpoint and a responsibility standpoint, I really only had myself. And when I knew I was going to be a dad, all of a sudden it was like, from here on out, somebody's life, their literal ability to survive is now dependent on me. And so that would be really the first instance that I would say I felt like I was a man. I felt, because that weight, that responsibility,
Ooh.
that because I think our culture does a disservice to young men in telling and essentially extending our
Adolescence.
childhood,
Yep,
our
childhood.
adolescence. Yeah.
Yep.
Because now you're seeing it now with Gen Z, where they are really starting to be, they're coming back and living at home
Oh, yeah.
until their late 20s and early 30s. And look,
Yeah.
here's the reality of it is that society, the economy is not amazing.
Yeah.
So there are things that I can completely understand that would make it more practical for them to live at home. What I think we are starting to see, or we have been seeing, is these adults, children who should be capable of doing, taking care of themselves, coming back home and then behaving as children.
Yep.
Right. It's one thing to come back because, there was a couple of times throughout my adulthood where one time in particular, when I was going through my divorce, where I came back and I lived at my parents' house for 6 months because
You had to get things together.
I did. I didn't have anywhere else to go.
Yep.
I was trying to navigate being a single dad and working and going. I at that point had re-enrolled in full-time college. And so I was really trying to navigate all these different things. And so it was a landing pad for me to kind of regroup. But I'll tell you, like, that was after being out on my own so I was 24, so like 6 years at this point.
I bet that was hard.
It was terrible. Honestly,
yeah.
like
You feel like almost, did you feel like you were being like almost constricted?
absolutely.
Yeah.
It was no longer, and part of that is my relationship with my parents, but it wasn't, I had to all of a sudden be conscientious of when I was coming in, when I was going, when I,
Yep.
when I would be back, all these things that as an adult, you're taking care of yourself and you're taking care of your family if you have a family, and that's it. You're not worried about, and so anyway, all that being said, I think what we're seeing now is this extension of adolescence far beyond what it should be. And so, but for me, I would say my first moment of feeling like I was, my first moment of manhood was, taking responsibility for being a dad.
Responsibility.
What about you guys?
Let's go, Mike. How about you? Because I'm actually really curious about your answer, only because of prior very brief conversations we've
Well,
had.
I don't really have an answer. Yeah, I mean,
That's why.
that's why I don't really have an answer. I mean, we've gotten to that topic before. I'm like, if I don't
Yeah.
feel like I have enough information or I haven't fully constructed a solid,
Premise?
yeah, there we go. I'm sorry, I've got the flu. I'm going to be a little slow today.
You're good, Dora.
If I don't fully agree
That
with
just
what
makes
I'm
it more
about to
fun for us.
say, it's hard for me to want to say it, right? So, and I've mentioned a lot of times the reasons why I like this podcast is because I'm part of that demographic that is searching for the answer.
Yeah.
So, from
All
my
of us
point
are.
of view, it's if I don't know what that target is, it's hard for me to say if I've even reached it.
Right. Right.
Going back to like when I wanted to give advice, I'm like, I have some answers, but I mean, a big part of me still doesn't feel like I've reached that point yet, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I do think it's interesting because Tim, you and I went through very similar
At the same time.
same time.
That is,
Our
I
kids,
always
our
forget
kids are
about
within
that.
months of each other. By the way,
That's
Within 1
that's
month.
so
so
wild.
for those of you guys who don't know, here I'm going to go to just me on this one because that's the wrong button. So for those of you who don't know, I'm not going to divulge much of Tim's story, but my story is at least me and my girlfriend of 2 weeks had gotten pregnant before we got married.
It was 2
Obviously.
weeks.
Oh yeah, well maybe like a month.
I was gonna say I thought it was a little bit longer.
Maybe
That's so much longer,
I-
Matt.
Hey, it's double.
It's really
It is 2 times the amount
it
there,
was really
Tim.
quick. Now,
Sorry,
as
math
Todd,
major.
as tawdry as that sounds, we've known each other since I was in 5th grade. So
Right.
it's not like this is somebody I'd never met and anything like that. all that to say that experience did evoke similar reactions that Tim had. And when Tim was saying when he found out that he was going to be a father, the notion of like, oh, great, now I'm responsible for this other life. And we had a lot of things to think about. Like we went through the adoption process. We were looking actually at putting our child up for adoption. We obviously did not go that route, but we got to the point where we're picking between, I think it was like 4 or 5 families that were wanting to adopt our kid. So we got that far in the process, and Tiffany was like, no, we're not going to go that route. She's like, I feel like I just need to keep the kid and all that. That's for a different story. But essentially I did have a very similar reaction to him. We're like, okay, I guess I'm like, I got to somehow step up to this responsibility, and the paradigm that I view life through has now changed.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I will say though, before that instant, like before we got pregnant and all that, I kind of fit into what Tim was describing as the Gen Z model of like, I never moved out of the house. So my parents got divorced right when I went to, right when I started college, essentially.
Yeah.
My dad left, and I stayed with my mom. My brother and my sister left. So it was just me and my mom in a house. And I kind of thought that was my role. Right. So once my parents split, that was, I think, the first thing where I realized like, oh, I'm going to have to figure out what this is on my own. I didn't feel like a man. I didn't feel like an adult at that point, but I was like, I'm here. My mom's here. Somebody's got to be taking care of some stuff. I guess that's me. Nobody's going to tell me how to do the next 4 years of my life and get through college or help me figure this out. So I guess that's me.
Yeah.
And I think that's ironically one reason why I still don't feel like I have the answers of what it meant. Like, I don't feel like a man. I got put into the position, and I didn't have anyone really hand off anything to me. It was, and I'm that kind of person. I like to be taught things hands-on, right?
Yeah.
So when it comes to, okay, my view on life and how everything works just got broken, and now I have to become a man all of a sudden. And I didn't have a person who was there walking me through that. Unfortunately, I'm the kind of person that needs somebody to walk me through it.
Yeah.
I think there are stronger individuals out there who will have taken that same life experience and they become great men because of it. I sadly was not one of them. I wasn't. So the fact that all happened, I struggled with the decision of what my wife and I were going to do, or, almost wife we're going to do.
Yeah.
So between my parents getting divorced and me being in college, and then all of a sudden, like a couple years later, me getting pregnant, those two things really kind of shook my notion of like my confidence in myself, ironically. And at the same time, I was like, I got to figure something out. So I've got to start faking something until I make it. And that's pretty much what I do to this day. I fake most of the stuff I do. Good or bad. And
do you fake it or do you imitate it?
I'm very good at recognizing patterns, so I imitate things. I also don't understand people a lot. So like social norms, just don't understand. I like to read a lot of psychology books, so I understand a lot of the process of what should have been happening and where my mind should go. And like, I do the same thing. I watch a lot of the motivational speakers and all this crap, and it's, I imitate.
Yeah.
But there's a difference between imitation and then owning, right?
Yeah.
I think that is also a big difference of what we talk about a lot of these times. We see these alpha males out there who are just cocky and arrogant and portraying this persona of what a man is, right?
Right.
And it rings hollow. And that's something I just never wanted to do. I'm like, I can see you're fake from a mile away, man. Like, I don't look like I'm jacked. I don't have $1 million in a Bugatti. I'm not getting laid by chicks every other minute. Like, I don't fit any of the stereotypes, and I don't want to, because none of that looks like what I want to become. So even everything I was seeing that was being modeled wasn't really what I wanted. I'm talking a lot here. Sorry.
Wow.
Yeah, I know.
I was about to say, for somebody who said, I don't have an answer, that was a really good and also long answer.
I mean, I will say one thing in conclusion, though. Like, and that's one reason why I like this podcast, is this does fit, especially like the interviews portion. I like the research aspects too, but like the interviews portion specifically, I've had to look, and I do this with my personality too. I look at people I'm seeing in my life, and I try to pull things from those, from like, not a direct interaction. So like, I saw people's dads, like your dad is one of them, Matt. Like he's a great coach.
I saw him too. He's pretty cool.
He's a great guy. For those of you who don't know, and it doesn't really matter, Matt's father was a basketball coach, an amazing basketball coach.
Yes, he was.
I've been in sports since I was like a fetus, and I've had many coaches. He was by far the best coach ever.
Yep.
He could call a timeout, chew you out in 10 seconds. And in that 10-second monologue, he could break you down to your bare core and then build you back up into something new that could just go terrorize everyone else on the court. It was amazing.
Yep.
But I pulled things from him. So like I would watch him parent you guys from afar, and
or from close up
or
on the
from
bench.
close up. And so like
We
I
were all
pulled
on the
things from
same
that.
team together, so they got some really close up views
Yeah.
of
Yep.
some parenting
Exactly. And I would do the
that
same
I
thing with
needed
the,
and deserved.
I would do the same thing with a few of the other parents that are around. Where like I wouldn't tell them. I wasn't like, hey, I'm kind of trying to figure this out. I'm gonna do what you do.
Yeah.
It was more like watching like I like that. That looks right.
Yeah.
Mm.
And so I do that. And so that's one reason why I like this podcast. It's because it's, in my view, it's an extension of that. Like, okay, who else can I talk to, and who can I say like, oh, I see your viewpoints on this. I really like this. I've seen the outcomes of your life's decisions. I agree with that.
Right.
It gets me to where I want to go. I'm
Yeah.
gonna start pulling those in.
Yeah.
And I would argue that people who don't have that in their lives, that's pretty much, if you don't have somebody who's been willing to step into that role,
Yeah.
because I do think on some level we are all looking for somebody to hand off the baton to us,
Yeah.
right? And not all of us get that, and for various reasons. Like I'm not saying my dad was a bad guy or didn't try or do anything like that. It just
Sure.
didn't happen.
Yeah.
I think that's important.
So I'm gonna cheat here because I asked that question deliberately in a way that was going to kind of elicit harder answers than it should have.
Sure.
So the question was, at what point do you enter manhood?
oh, sorry.
The moment I started thinking about that, I don't think there's a specific point that it just switches. I view it almost like a staircase, right?
Okay.
Every step brings you closer to manhood, the journey into manhood. And then after that, it almost becomes like flights of stairs up to different levels of manhood. And I'll kind of explain what I mean by my own, just kind of from my own life. The first moment I look back and I think, okay, I started that journey into manhood was when I started having a serious relationship with the woman who ended up being my wife.
Mm.
And at that moment, I think that was when it started for me. And then we got engaged. I think that was that next big step up. And then we got married. And I think that was, for me, the big step for me into that, finally into the realm of manhood. But it was multiple steps leading up to that.
Right.
And I say that because, again, almost the exact same thing you guys said. All of a sudden, I was responsible for somebody else. All of a sudden, I had a whole new family. I had this woman who was depending on me, right? And I started looking at the world very differently. I think another big step would be when we had our first kid, when we had Ellie, my oldest daughter. And I think about that big jump from, oh my gosh, it's all fun and games right now with the two of us, but now we have this little monster that, and poor, oh my gosh, our daughter, she, for the first about 9 months of her life, she had colic. And it was not just like, oh, she'd spit up. It was like volcanic, exorcist, like fire hose. I'm not kidding. That is not an exaggeration. If anyone knows me, I do exaggerate sometimes. That was not an exaggeration, like at all. She would, oh my gosh, I remember one of my friends was bouncing her on his knee. She like tipped her head back and just volcanoed all over him. And I was laughing so hard. And my wife was so embarrassed. And I was just dying. I thought it was the funniest thing ever. That shows you what kind of a friend I am, apparently. Sorry, Tim and Mike. But yeah, I remember that. But like, it was so hard those first 9 months. But to be honest, we didn't know any different. We just kind of thought, that's okay. This is parenting. This is what we got to deal with. I would stay up until about 1, 2, 3 in the morning with her. She would be in her little swing because that's the only thing that would settle her stomach was being in the swing. If you stopped the swing, she would spit her passy out and just start crying. So I would be up until about 3. Jamie would go to sleep at like 7 or 8 o'clock at most. And then usually Ellie would probably sleep from like 3 to 4. And then she'd wake up and then Jamie would have to get up and I would sleep until it was time to go to work,
Right.
which I was doing 2 jobs. So I was working like 60-hour weeks, if I remember correctly. I was doing part-time teaching at a little middle school in Greeley called Franklin Middle School. And then I would work at Best Buy at night and I would close. So I'd come home late. Jamie would try to already be asleep. I would take Ellie. Like we just were like missing each other for a while.
Yep.
But that was a huge step because it became this idea of, again, that idea of is I am responsible for someone other than myself and I want to be. Right? That's a big difference there when your mindset goes from, okay, I have to be responsible versus I want to be responsible, right? And I think that's that next flight of stairs up in manhood is all of a sudden it becomes, okay, yeah, you have responsibility, but now you want it. You start recognizing the importance of it and you desire it, right? And so I would make that kind of, that would be my, I don't know if I want to call it an argument, but my answer would be those steps up into manhood and then that continued journey and you see those different phases. And so, Mike, when you say, I don't know if I feel like a man, I think you're wrong on that. I think that your mindset, and yeah, he's going to disagree with
I'm
me.
gonna
That's
argue,
okay.
yeah.
But yeah, I think your mindset is very different on it. But when I look at you, I definitely see someone who has climbed those steps.
Well, thank you.
Go ahead now, argue against me and tell everybody you haven't climbed those steps.
It's
I'm
not.
just kidding. I'm joking.
It's more of a. Well, I think. Be clear. I think somebody's observations, if they can point out observations, and then they're valid, right? If there's fact behind them, I think that's fair. I also do think everyone's individual perception of themselves is also very important, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So we are also trying to. I'd say we're distinguishing between the two, right? So like my role in life and the feats I've accomplished, I would say have measured up to I am an adult male. I'm a man. I have a house. I have got 2 kids. I'm married, and I'm been married to the same woman for 15 years, and I provide value to society, right? Those are like the external metrics. I, however, personally do not feel so. My personal perception of it is different.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting the way like you phrase it versus even the way that Tim and I were viewing things. I think not saying that yours is invalid in any way. I think it's very valid, but I think it's also interesting to kind of hear that viewpoint from somebody who you feel like you did have a very strong role model of a man in your life and somebody to help raise you in such a manner.
I had more than one.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
right. And that's the thing that.
So I would be curious to get data and see other people from different backgrounds. Cause it's like, for you, it's like, yeah, I'm a man, but now I'm climbing these steps of like becoming even further into a man. Whereas like, I feel like that my phrase was the baton was never passed.
Yes.
I always wanted more responsibility and I'm taking it, but it's still this feeling of like, I have not been validated. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm guessing, things of that nature. So I'm curious how much of that transition feeling has to do with like your upbringing. And if you feel like you had a male role model in your life who validated that and helped kind of show you what it was.
Go ahead. So I was thinking about this, and I don't remember if I've shared this or not, but I was taking my kids to school and I had dropped them off, and on the way I was going to work. It just kind of hit me that I think all young men, all boys, they desire to be the Robin to somebody's Batman.
Yeah,
they desire that, but then they also desire
to eventually
become Batman.
Yeah,
right. Like, but
pick up the cape and the cowl. Yeah,
exactly. And so, but there's that process along the way, and I think that we all desire that process because I think we innately know I don't have all the answers. I want somebody to show me what it looks like. What does it look like to be Batman?
Yeah.
What does it look like to do these amazing feats that I want to aspire to, that they make me better, right?
Well, and if you've never had a Batman to look up to you,
yes.
And this is kind of my point here, Mike, is I don't think maybe, and I don't want to step on a limb here, but if you didn't have that role model to look up to and see someone mimicking those steps, do you know where you're at? And if you're even doing the right thing? Like, you could be at the point where you're Batman or better, but you never really saw Batman, so you don't really know. So you constantly have that almost imposter syndrome like feeling, where in reality, you're there.
Well, so
but
that's where
in
I'm
your
like,
own mindset, that makes it harder to recognize.
That's kind
because
of
you
what I
don't
mean
know
by
what you're
like, there's
recognizing.
a different, I think there's a difference between like externally, do you possess those markers? No. Are you exhibiting the traits and the responsibilities of what a man does, right? Versus the perception that you hold yourself.
Yeah.
That's a psychological battle.
Yes.
Like, we all have to deal with our own things, right?
Yes.
And then how I feel is how I feel. And I've got to figure out why I'm dealing with that baggage. I'd be very curious to see the answers to that question, like that you asked us, at what point does somebody come in, by comparing different men's backgrounds. Because I think like the fact that our answers were kind of different, like the perception, my self-perception is really what's different. I would argue like, you're right. Yeah, I've made certain steps and I agree with that. But the psychological battle that I still have to deal with and how I feel about myself is still different.
I was gonna say, I think it's also personality too, though, Mike.
It might be.
It's because that is your person. Your personality is you want that data to back it up and all that stuff.
I need validation.
And in me, I deal in more abstract ideas.
No.
And so, no, absolutely not.
Well,
but
and I think the idea of the validation is really important because, again, I think as we are stepping into manhood, and I like how you talked about it being a flight of stairs, because I think that a lot of people picture masculinity, manhood as this end goal.
Yeah.
Like, I got there and now I'm a man.
Yeah.
And that's not really what the process is. It's like, it is this process of becoming more and more and more of a man. Right.
Yes.
And so I think that as we're looking at this, like how we perceive, like what we perceive is true about ourselves really is going to impact, as you guys have kind of talked about, like where we feel like we are in that journey. And if we haven't had somebody come along and validate that and not coming, and here's the thing, there's a difference between someone coming along and going, oh yeah, you're a man, and somebody who's important to you that you know without a shadow of a doubt, he is that Batman, coming in and going, you are a man. And I'm not saying like we need somebody to come in and say those exact words. What I am saying is there needs to be I think there needs to be a validation of that.
Well, what if we look at it this way? Instead of being a flight of stairs, it's a path, and it twists and it turns, and there's other intersecting paths that can take you the wrong way. And when you have somebody who's guiding you, right, a guide, someone to follow in their footsteps, or at least you can see those markings and say, okay, that's where my dad went. I want to go that way. Or maybe that's where my dad went, but he left me a sign that says, don't go this way. I came back and went, you know what I mean? And that's what I was trying to get across, I guess, in my example to you, Mike, is that, you know, that idea that I had someone, and not just one person, but I had uncles who were good men who I got to look up to and got to see them. And I got, you know, I had my dad, and then he had friends, right? And then I had friends who had dads, and some of them were very good and some of them were not. And so I got to see people taking those different paths, and I got to see the ultimate result of it in their kids and in those men. And so I think maybe that might actually be a better example, instead of like a flight of stairs, but rather like almost like a path that leads and twists, and there's, you know, different turns. And I think there is a right way.
So here's a thought. Just kind of thinking off of that.
Yeah.
Because like, if there are different stages, right?
Uh-huh.
Because I would agree with that. I think as anything in life, it's a journey. Where you're looking for constant progress. If you look at your career, you don't start off at the top. You start off at entry level and you work your way up through different.
Unless you know the boss.
Unless you know yeah. I'm not that guy.
Hey, I'm not gonna lie. My second year of teaching, I was a department lead teacher.
Well, you know,
but
when you're good, you're good.
Nobody else wanted the job. Just to let you know, that was not because I was exceedingly special. I look back at my second year teaching, and it terrifies me. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you're fine.
I was just thinking about
I'm just thinking through that. Like the question you asked, my answer wants to be like, technically we start that journey at the very beginning. We start that journey in our youth, in our childhood.
Yes.
That's really where it starts. So it's more like we're looking at specific milestones on that journey. Like, what do you feel like are the, I know you like that.
I love that term. That was going to be my question.
So I feel like the first milestone, like I think that's what I'm arguing is like when I feel like I've crossed that threshold between the child and now the adult, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what a lot of us kind of struggle with, is that transition from adolescence to adulthood. But I do think there are other markers that are like we are end up going for. Like we've talked a lot about how men are to be leaders. It's like that's one of the last ones you really get. Like we get to be leaders as men in our families, and then depending on how you grow and that path evolves, you might become a leader in your company, your community, and your country, whatever it is. But at some point, the previous generation that was leading you down the path that they knew best has to fall off, and you are left there holding the responsibility for what is to come.
Yeah.
Right?
So on that note, though, I think that was perfect, because I was going to ask you guys a question. What if we start trying to come up with some milestones on this show right now that we think crosses that line? What I want to start with, though, before we even start answering it, though,
I could hear the eye roll from Mike.
I know.
Over here.
It was not.
Mike is like, I don't want to answer questions.
Wheels are turning.
But before we even answer it, though, I did a little bit of Google AI research. Now take that for what you will.
It's AI, so it's intelligent.
It's got to be right. Yeah. No. I just kind of looked into different ancient cultures.
Okay.
And I wanted to kind of see if there were any themes in those cultures as what they saw as, this is manhood, this is becoming a man, these are the expectations of a man, and then our answers. So I want to go through just a couple of those with you guys, if you're okay with that.
No.
Tim's not okay with that. All right, so Mike's the only one listening. No, I'm just kidding. I always tell my students, tough luck. Your opinion doesn't actually matter here. That's what I always tell my students. It's not a democracy in my classroom. It's a dictatorship.
As it should
That's
be.
right. God King of the Classroom. I should have that title. I do have kids that call me Darth Swanee. Oh, instead of Mr. Swanee. That's
No,
like
sorry,
the great
God
title.
King of the Classroom.
I was
God
gonna
King of
say-
the Classroom.
I want to make
Like a
a
shirt.
plaque for you that says that, and
I'd be down with
you
that.
display it like above your door.
Principal
God
walks
King of the
in. What is
Classroom.
that? Don't worry about that.
Don't worry about that. Just ignore it. Don't worry about
Anyway,
it. Okay, so I first started with ancient China. And so this is the Google AI answer, by the way, but I'm just going to read off a list of just traits that they wanted in their men.
Traits or
And,
milestones?
Traits, these are traits that they're looking
Got
for. Expectations of a man. Physical and mental strength. Okay, so honor. Men were expected to maintain a reputation for honor. Responsibility for family affairs, legal, economic, political, any sort of outer dealing of the family. Care for parents. Physical ability. So this one mentions men who are skilled with horse riding, archery, swordsmanship, and martial arts. Participation in the government. So that is ancient China. So try to pull some threads here of things that sound similar. Okay, this one is ancient Japan. Work for the nation, so work for the good of the rest of the country, the rest of the realm. Be strong and tough. Follow the Bushido code, which was stressed loyalty, respect, ethical behavior, self-discipline. Having long work hours. Detachment from family, which is kind of an interesting one.
that is.
See the workplace as their identity.
Ooh.
These sound more like stereotypes to me, by the way, and that is something I want us to be aware of, which is
Yep.
kind of interesting.
Well, I don't think those are too. Never mind.
Oh, I know.
Well-
This is cultural. We are talking about different cultures too. But I do think it does go into the realm of stereotype to an extent. But I'll continue with a different one here. This one's kind of interesting. So this is medieval England. So we're going to a different area. Martial and capable of violence.
Yep.
Head of the household. So again, head of the house. Oath of allegiance, loyalty. Social relations. Men's social relations with other men were important. Kind of interesting there. Another one, ancient Egypt. So again, I'm trying to go to each different continent, by the
Yeah.
way, in case you were
Good job.
I like
wondering.
that because we're trying to find.
Ancient Egypt, men had many expectations, including food production, crafts, administration, so politics, defense. Men were responsible for defending the population. Marriage, unmarried men were seen as incomplete. Training, boys were trained in trades and professions by their fathers, and wisdom carried on from texts. So masculinity was often passed on from generation, meaning humility, moderation, generosity, benevolence, and loyalty. Aspects of masculinity in ancient Egypt. I got two more for you. Ancient India, breadwinners, protectors, decision makers within the family, especially. Religious leaders, adherers to masculine views such as growing wealth, generosity, hospitality, strong physique, participants in coming of age rituals, and participants in marriage and fatherhood. The last one I have is the Vikings.
Nice.
With the Vikings. Viking men were expected to have these certain qualities: courage, honor, discipline, industriousness, fighting, navigating and sailing, trade, and diplomacy. Okay, so we just looked at 6 different, very ancient sort of cultures. What themes did you hear in those? What themes did you see?
I think. Well, we got the same themes. Like mentioned, like service to your country.
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
like,
service to your
listed as
country.
government, all these kind of things. Like men are supposed to produce value. Like it was. That's
production.
that. So I'm saying it like that because it covers the basis of like you're supposed to learn a skill, a trade, a craft.
Yeah.
Right. You're supposed to be able to defend, and then 2, you're also supposed to reproduce.
Yep.
Like like the whole men are not seen as men until they have a wife and have side offspring. Like all that thing. That's
Yep.
very common through most cultures.
Yeah.
And here's an interesting question. Okay, all those cultures, were they next door neighbors? Were they sharing texts?
No, we don't.
No.
So,
I mean,
like,
you could
make the argue with like India and China a little bit
No,
more.
we're making
Japan
the
area.
argument that these are intrinsic values that each culture, each
And
society is going to be
these are
looking for.
different time periods
Yeah,
in
for sure.
different places
For
where they
sure.
haven't even interacted yet. And yet you see common threads and themes of manhood and masculinity
right.
crossing these cultures and crossing between people that have never even really interacted.
Sure.
And so that brings me back to the question that sort of launched this part of the episode is, what milestones do we need to look for to bring our boys into manhood.
So it's interesting. One of the as you were reading through those, the first thing my brain went to is these are societal adults.
Mm-hmm.
Like these are not children. And as I brought up earlier, society plays a huge part in determining when somebody's an adult.
Yep.
Right? You look at 150 years ago, and I don't know the age that they say that you were considered an adult. I do know though that when you were 12, right, you could be protecting the farm while your parents were going to town, that was multiple days trip away, and you were expected to take care of your siblings. You were expected to run the farm.
Yep.
You were expected to do all of these things, right? I think of I have a 10-year-old. I barely expect him to clean his room.
Trust him,
and so like the idea that so society plays a huge part in this, and I bring that up because when society says this age is adult, everything that they do behind that is really preparing them for that,
or it should,
be. That, right.
Yeah. I think that's something we do disservice on. Like, I'm going to harp in for 2 seconds.
No, go ahead.
I'm sick of seeing this. I talk about how I like parenting stuff a lot. I one thing that I hate is parents who set arbitrary dates or ages. Like, you can't play Call of Duty until you're 13. Why?
Right.
What on God's green earth changes from 12 to 13 that lets him wield an AK-47 and shoot his friends online? Tell me now, please. And
maturity, ability to separate real from fake.
Exactly, but you have to prepare them for that, right?
But does it happen at 12 and between 12
does
and 13?
Does it happen? And what magically
for some kids, sure.
Well, no, it doesn't. I would argue strongly it doesn't. I would argue that nothing of it has to do with anything with time. At least not just arbitrary.
As someone
age.
who teaches junior high, I'm very tempted to tell you are very wrong.
But is that a biological thing?
Hold on. Let me finish the statement.
No, go ahead.
I'm arguing it has absolutely zero to do with their time, their age, and how long they've been on Earth. And that's how most parents and most people set that arbitrary time. When you're 13, you can do this. When you're 16, you can do this. When you're 18, you can do this.
Yeah.
Why? Well, historically, it's because by that age, I should have left you at the farm. I should have taught you how to use a gun and how to find a wolf in the pack. I should have taught you how to take care of your sisters and what sounds to listen for. I should have taught you these skills by that age because that's what you can handle. And then slowly, as age progresses, I should be handing off more and more and more responsibilities and skills that will prepare you to take on those responsibilities. Yeah. And I think that's what society does a disservice on now. That's one reason why I felt insecure. It's like by the time I got to having a kid, I was ill-prepared, not by anyone else's fault, because I should have gone and learned things, but I was not in an environment where I was being prepared to take on that mantle.
Sure.
I did not have the requisite skills. And so I'd argue that society nowadays is literally doing the exact opposite. We're not equiping our youth with the skills to then take on the mantle of adulthood and the responsibilities.
Now that I agree with.
We are removing them from them. We're like, oh, you feel offended because he said a word you don't like. Buckle up, Buttercup. It gets worse.
Yep.
Somebody's depending on you. And if you're sitting there crying in a corner because a mugger came out and said a mean word to you, who's going to defend your wife?
Right.
Like, what's going on in your mind that's going to let you think that that's okay?
Well, and I mean, I think the point you brought up of, again, we're not preparing boys to be men.
Yeah.
Absolutely agree with that. I mean, the whole like violent video games thing or whatever, I do set limits on that because, again, I can tell you there are some junior hires that know how to separate fact from fiction and know how to understand that, right? And understands the game. I can tell you now, I've had some junior hires where I'm like, wow, I am terrified of what you might do if you ever got your hands on a real gun.
Sure.
Because, again, that is partially biological. There are kids that grow up slower than others. Boys in particular grow up significantly slower than women.
Yeah,
sure.
It's the truth. And so, like, again, setting that arbitrary age, it tends to be a generalization and a rule. But again, you as the parent should be paying attention to your kids.
You should be able to evaluate. My thing with that is, like, even when you were saying, like, kids develop at different rates.
Yep.
That's what we're talking about. That's why it is the parent not setting an arbitrary value of like, yeah, okay, Zoe develops in some areas remarkably quick, in others remarkably slow. That doesn't mean when she turns 13, I'm going to give her the same freedoms everyone else does. I will give her more in certain areas because she's been prepared for such. Right. So even if that person is developing faster, that means that they have the capacity to understand and do it. They will not naturally develop the skill sets or the tools requisite to handle it. It still needs to be taught And the funny part is a lot of times the kids who are developing rather rapidly, they're doing it because they have the ability to observe what's going on and learn those skills through third party, but they're still learning a skill. They're not just arbitrarily waking up one day and like, I have the maturity to handle this. It's
no, and I
learned
agree
coping
with
mechanisms
you on that.
through like various interactions. I now know how to cope with stress because I found this works for me. They can't articulate it as well, but they will go like, yeah, if I go shoot hoops, I'm going to deal with my stress better than if I just don't.
So no, I agree with you. I was looking at it more of like a societal perspective of like, this is the suggestion. Does that make sense? Like I was thinking rating on a video game, we put it there to give people a general idea of around this age time is usually when you see the maturity to handle this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think
to be honest, I think we agree, and I think we're saying the same thing in different words.
We are,
I
think the only thing I'm pointing out is like historically when we set those, like when we first came up with the TV
because
ratings,
it was, hey, you're 12, you need to know how to handle this gun by now.
Well, think about like the TV ratings and like because before video games ratings there was TV ratings, and even PG showed nudity in PG movies. I don't know if you guys know that, but we have plenty of PG movies from like the 80s that flash scenes.
Well, I mean, Jaws was PG.
Well, yeah. But so my point was though, like going back to Tim's idea of like society didn't arbitrarily pick those. They were aware of the current societal standards of how a parent is interacting with their kids and what responsibilities a child should have by certain ages. They were going by that snapshot in time to set those ratings.
Yeah.
Which is funny because you see those ratings changed over the next 10 years to become more strict.
Yep.
PG no longer had the same content it is, and then they created PG-13.
Yeah.
Right.
Because they saw
adjustments.
They saw adjustments were being made. And now they just want money, so they put R on everything and let everybody watch everything because they don't give a crap. Right. But it is that idea of society is playing a part in what everyone thinks these milestones are. Because we're saying, well, when you're 18, you're allowed to vote.
Right.
Why? But you can't drink, and I can't. And,
and
I
you can serve your country, but you can't. Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of vestigial artifacts here from things that
I don't know.
necessarily.
Are we really going to make the argument we want a bunch of 18-year-olds getting hammered?
Here's the thing.
I think that's an interesting discussion.
That's the thing, though.
But again, you can go off and fight and die for your country, but you can't have a beer.
You can influence who becomes the leader. So you're apparently smart enough to pick.
Well, if
your
you're going to be
next
going out
leader.
to a war, you should be able to at least vote on who's sending you.
Oh, I 100%
so
agree
I'm
with
down
that.
with that.
No, I don't want this to come up. I think here's where I think we need to like focus is what are we equipping our kids and how are we equipping our kids to hit that milestone, right? We're setting these milestones.
Yep.
And when I think about, so if 18 is adulthood and you know,
what do our kids need by the time they get there?
Exactly. So I should be able to trust you enough to make decisions because your decisions are impacting the entire nation, right? However, there are other things that we don't trust you with. And so what that does is that really sets an interesting precedent for how we raise our kids.
Yes.
Right. Well, you have to wait till you're 21 to drink. Well, why? Well, because, you know, and the funny thing is, I think there's like people like to point to like developmental factors. Your prefrontal cortex is not fully developed until you're 25.
Yeah, as men especially.
Even up to there's some things that say up to 30, right? So like I'm saying is if you're trying to use biological development as the basis for your argument, you're wrong, right? By picking 18 or 21.
Yeah.
And I would argue that regardless of those things, if you equip your children, if you're equipping adults to do adult things,
then right, they'll be fine.
They'll be fine. Mm-hmm. You should be able to trust them with that.
Here's the interesting thing too, because like Matt brought up, not on screen, Matt brought up the milestones, and we just went over like cultural similarities.
Yep.
And I'm like, I think those are great rubrics to use when trying to parent. Like by 18, my goal is to have done all these things and gotten them to this point. Like by 18, my child has to have a basic self-defense understanding.
Yeah.
Because their brain is capable, their body is capable. I need to get their body to have that functionality done.
Yeah.
They need to be able to provide some value. Well, that means they have to have certain cognitive skills that I've equipped them with. They have to have certain physical or technical skills that I've equipped them with, at least to go off into the world and start doing something.
Yeah.
They need to be aware of how to be responsible, be respectful in society, and understand the local cultural aspects that are important to culture to fit in and to be productive, right? These are all things that are milestones. And I think it's interesting because it's like that is a parent's responsibility to typically hand that off. And if they don't, I think that's kind of where we're going, right? Like it's the question of, if somebody did not hand it off to you, then at what point then do you become a man?
Yeah.
Do you acquire them yourselves and that's when you become the man? Like, I think it's perfectly rational to think that that's possible.
Yeah.
But I do think I like the idea of looking through those skills as the milestones, right? Like, and then by age, whatever, if you have them, you've reached you know, you can be a man. But that's, again, going back to the very initial conversation where I was like, you said I meet certain qualifiers to be a man. I would say that's that.
Or
list.
manhood.
Exactly. Manhood, right? Like, I meet the basic qualifiers.
I liked that.
But
term better, by the way.
psychologically, I personally do not perceive myself as fully like worthy of stepping into that arena, right? So I think it's always interesting to kind of watch those two things. At least
confidence is not a big part of your personality, correct?
Not even close.
I mean, there's people like, I'll be fully honest here. There's a lot of things that I feel very confident in that I know I'm actually not that good at. And I was definitely, but that's what made me a decent teacher is like, I will create a new lesson and I will throw that crud in front of my students. And if it fails miserably, I don't care. I have 10 other tries at it because I teach the same class 10 times in 2 days. Sorry, guinea pigs, your first 3 classes, it ain't going to be very good, but the next 7 are going to be awesome, right? And that's, you can see the difference between mine and Mike's personalities.
Yeah.
There was one of the cultures I didn't actually bring up, and that was actually biblical manhood. Okay. And manhood according to the Bible. And I forgot to pull that one up. I was looking at it at home, but it mentions basically everything that we mentioned. That idea of, again, being able to defend and protect. That's a big milestone in biblical manhood, or a big, expectation. Taking care of the family, loving your wife. Sacrifice was a huge one, which I think anyone who studies the Bible knows sacrifice is a huge part of the Bible, of biblical manhood, especially. It is expected for men to sacrifice their ways. Now, again, that doesn't mean that women aren't expected to sacrifice, but the sacrifices are in different ways, right? And I think you look at these cultures that are totally different in different parts of the world, and yet they all expected men to do almost the exact same thing that biblical manhood was also saying, that God says, look, this is what I expect from you men. Do it. This is what's going to fulfill your life. And you look at it throughout history, and those are the expectations every single society had for their men.
Right.
It was almost like it's built into us, ingrained. And now we look at this modern day world where all of a sudden defense has a different realm almost, right? Yeah, there is personal and self-defense and defending your family, but guns kind of equalized things pretty good there, didn't they? That's a different realm now. Production, right? Women are expected to produce now, which I think is a terrible idea. Not that women can't produce, but that I think it's important for moms to be able to be moms.
Sure.
I remember growing up with my mother. I remember having my mom there and how that important that was to me as a boy growing up, just like also having my dad there. And when you have neither parent, all of a sudden that you can see the issues.
Right.
You can see the missing of those miles. And like you were saying, the equipment, right? What are we missing in equipping our kids for adulthood? And when we don't have mothers there to do it, that's a big missing piece of the family.
I would even argue, I would go so far as to argue that we now, not only do we need moms, but we need the dads, right? And we know that. Right.
But I wasn't saying, by the way, I wasn't saying that.
I know you weren't.
I was going to actually try to go in that, but you hit it.
Yeah, no, you need
you're
both.
You're very passionate about that.
I am. No, and because here's the thing, again, you start going back and looking backwards through history, and what do you see? You see men involved in the family. It's not just these guys who go off to work and aren't involved and then come back. Right, they're involved in the family. Which culture was it that you said they're India?
Japanese, actually.
Well, India, they were expected to take care of their family. Who was that? Was it China?
Well, it was China was the outer things, like the family interacting with the rest of the world. India was very big on
one of those.
Egypt said it too. So
the idea of not only are you taking care of yourself and your kids, but you're taking care of your parents.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Like that sticks out to me because that's not something we even believe in America.
Which is heartbreaking, to be honest.
And it needs to change.
I'm
I'm with Tim.
You know, some people.
I will be honest with you. My wife and I have already planned on, we want to buy some land and we want to be able to build 2 small
Compound.
houses that are, but we want to have houses right near our house for our parents so that Jamie
Sure.
and I can take care of them.
Sure.
That is
And
more
we will
financially
never
ambitious
put
than
them-
I can possibly.
I don't care. I will do it. And I know how to build stuff. I've YouTube too.
Hey, Dad.
I've done it. I've redone.
Mom, I built you this house. I don't know if it's gonna fall down on
I
you.
have practically built a house already.
YouTube certified. Don't
This
worry.
stupid house that I've built. Oh my gosh, the one
No,
we're living
Matt,
in right now.
In Matt's defense, he has learned from people who know how to do well. on
Yeah,
YouTube.
and I've done it.
Yeah.
I've done a lot of it. But no, that, I
Absolutely.
think I do think that's interesting that you brought up the whole parent thing about caring not only about our future but also about the past.
Asked. Yeah.
And that's as a history teacher, as a man who loves history, that idea of caring about the elderly and caring about my parents and then valuing the people who came before us with
Yeah.
more experience than I very much take that seriously.
Yeah.
I have an uncle who does genealogy for our family and stuff like that, and he goes and visits many cemeteries, and it's cool the pictures he takes, and he talks about like, I couldn't even see this gravestone; it's so faded.
Dang.
I could just make out like this one name, but it's like it's sad at the same time. It's interesting to be like some of these are still carved, like almost like people will pay to have them recarved,
Mm-hmm.
and some don't.
Yep.
And it's like you don't even know where your family is from, and it's kind of a sad thing to an extent. But I think valuing our parents is, I like including that in the idea of manhood.
Yeah.
Protecting, right? I'm not just protecting my kids and my wife,
Right.
but I also look after my parents as well.
Do you think now this is completely tangential? So
Go
it's
ahead.
Not like a,
Go
Go ahead,
for
what
it.
you got?
and I'm not saying this reflects anybody here. You said you think that your parents, your previous generation history should be valued. Should it, or does it need to be valuable? There's a difference.
Human beings have
So-
inherent value, period.
Yes, that is very true.
And they are human beings.
But I'm also not the God who's valuing them all the time. And I would argue that different people have different value economically. And I'd also argue that different people live their lives in ways where they can shut people out. So by the time certain people are old, did they
Okay,
provide enough
so I
value
think
into somebody
that's-
else's life where that person wants to then provide for them in their elderly stages, right? So
Let me ask you something, Mike. You're a Christian, correct?
Yeah.
What do you think Christ would tell you to do?
my job is to take care of the sick and needy.
And the elderly.
I didn't say
It
what I was.
emphasizes
So
elderly.
I didn't say what I was going to do though, but you said that we should. That's also like a
Well,
reli-
value
hold on,
meaning-
Listen. Hold on a second. I'm asking like more like a not from a religious standpoint, just from the
Mike,
logical
you should
standpoint.
be on the screen.
Yeah, I was gonna say you
I
need
just-
to put yourself on the screen there.
So not
pal.
from religious, we all know we're Christian. We all know that if that's what we believe, that's what we would follow, right? That is also different than just the average. Like if somebody grew up with parents who did not value them, was not there. If that person doesn't believe in what we believe in, what do you think the odds are going to be of them then valuing that parent who wasn't there for them in their elderly stages? Why do you think that they should care to help them live out
because
the
it's
rest
the
of their
right
life?
thing to do.
What makes it right?
What do you mean? What makes it right?
Well, okay, we can
Are
get
you
to that.
telling me right now that you don't think that? So again,
It depends
Let's
on
go
like
back-
where you get your more. Okay, so now we're gonna get into that conversation.
I
of, like,
know it
where does
depends on
morality come
where-
from, and then that. But that's
I don't
different.
want to get into that too much, but when you ask me why should I value other human beings who haven't valued me, basically, what are you supposed to do with your enemies, Mike?
I'm trying to think
Love
if
your
that's
enemies,
actually
do
what I'm
good to
trying
those
to
who
phrase.
hate you, and bless those who curse
Again,
you.
no,
right?
hold on. You're going back to the Bible though, and
I
I'm
am.
trying.
Oh yeah.
I'm,
Well, I'm going
I know,
biblically.
but I'm trying distinctly to remove that from the
Okay, so
conversation.
you want us to
He's
take
asking-
a step back.
He's asking, okay,
How
if-
would you make that argument
So I'm not.
outside of
I'm
the
not saying
Bible?
what I would. I'm not arguing. This is what I'm personally
Yeah.
going to do, and
Yeah.
I'm caring about. No, I'm saying.
I
I
would-
just heard you say like, well, we should value history. I'm like, what if the history
So-
sucked for that person? Why should they value the history that was wrong?
Have you? And I mean, I got two questions. Number, have you guys seen Inception?
yes.
Yes.
Okay. What do they do with the guy? What do they do when it comes to his getting him to understand that idea and make it a part of him? Do they make him hate his father, who treated him
It's been so
horribly?
long.
What did he do? Do you remember?
Yeah.
It was all about catharsis. It was all about that need for some sort of good ending
Sure.
to things, right?
He wanted
And
his father to think of him good enough to go and build his own empire.
Yes.
He wanted validation.
Yep, he wanted that validation. And I think part of me goes back to this idea of I don't think I've ever regretted treating someone who I didn't like well.
Sure.
I've never regretted treating them well. I've worked in the Geek Squad. I have had people who came in with their laptop that they spilled Coke on and it's 9 years old and they want me to replace it for free because they bought it from Best Buy 9 years ago. And I'm like, that's not how this works. And I have to be kind and respectful as part of my job. I have never once regretted it. I have regretted being rude. I have regretted, and this is somebody, again, this is somebody
That's
I don't
fair.
even know that I'm not connected to. I've never regretted doing the right thing to somebody who didn't deserve it. Ever in my life. But I have regretted stooping to that level and taking it out against them.
Yeah.
So my suggestion would be, hold on to your hatred and bitterness. Hang on to it. But bitterness is like anything else.
See,
You
that's
both gotta
interesting that
drink
you see that
poison.
it was only binary.
Well, I think it's not so much binary as it is so much that
Well, you just said
you
hate-
can have a
hold on.
little bit of poison.
just-
It's not
you
going to
just-
kill you, but it's still going to harm you.
That's binary. What I mean by that
No.
is
There's
you
the
would,
point where it kills
well,
you, and there's the point where you're still
No. What I mean is like the two you would
There's
just
a lot in
express
there.
the answer in only two different emotions. You expressed one through love, which was your initial one. Your
Yep.
parents did a great job. You want to take care of them. You want to build them a house. That's a loving act, right? These are love. Then you said at the very end of your last statement, you said, hold on to that hatred and bitterness. Do they really have to hate them?
Well, if somebody's in need and you deliberately ignore them, let's say you don't like them.
Well, I
much,
think-
or
Hold on,
you
let's
think-
explore
or
that for a
what
second.
is what is like
let's just say that person had plenty of opportunities in life. The parents had
Okay.
plenty of opportunities.
Okay.
All they did was take advantage, lie, cheat, and steal everything. They made every wrong choice.
Okay.
The person has already tried helping them throughout their life. Let's say their offspring has already offered many times to try to help. They've gotten burned, they've gotten rejected, they've gotten ignored, they've gotten lied to, all the things, right?
Yep.
At what point?
You give me the absolute worst possible thing, right?
So at what point, let's say that person has no animus towards them. I've gotten screwed, whatever.
There's
I'm gonna let-
apathy.
there's apathy.
yeah,
I'm just gonna let them live their life.
is apathy a good thing? What do you think, Tim?
That's kind of where I'm at. I'm like, is
How
them
would
just
you
letting
answer
them
that?
go? Like
Man,
they've
this-
laid their path. Should we let them go down their own path? Or
Well, I
why
think there's a
should
line
you have
between
to-
letting someone go down their own path. I'm not, and I think we've gotten a little bit
We
off
have.
track here.
That's why I said it was a
Yeah,
tangent.
because
I was just
I
curious.
think this was more of like an exercise of pushing things to the extreme. Even then, I still think the right decision is to do the right thing, which is to help someone. And even if they're at the end of their life, yeah, like even through that, don't you think pushing through that apathy to do something good for somebody who even doesn't deserve it is still worth it? But again, I it's hard for me to not approach that from the point of view that I have
Sure.
towards valuing human beings have inherent value. That's what I
Mhm.
believe.
Absolutely.
Even the worst people, right? That's why
Here's-
we still put criminals on trial and we give them a fair trial.
Yeah.
Even when we know what they did, we know what this mass shooter did, he still gets a fair trial because he has that inherent value. If we strip that from somebody, it can be stripped from us, right?
Sure.
We also remove the offending criminal from society if they
Yes.
are a danger or a threat, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Are you saying that like old people who were mean to you your whole life are
I'm saying that's a very
threat?
real. I think what I'm saying is that's a very real thing that a lot of people tend to overlook. A lot of people think that it's my obligation to take care of my family.
Sure.
There are a lot of toxic, and I do mean that in the actual world. Not
Oh, yeah.
word. I don't mean that in the way that
the wolf
masculinity.
toxic?
No, I mean like it is detrimental to you and your children if you allow that person to be
Yeah.
anywhere near them in their lives.
And
So
here's,
then, where does your responsibility?
I think the other piece of it is we haven't really defined like what do we mean by taking care of, right? Because is this
Yeah.
is this hey, I send them a card on their birthday,
didn't
I
mean
give
they
them a
had-
call,
yeah.
is that taking care of them?
And by the way, taking care of them doesn't mean, okay, I have to go build you a house right next door to me, like I was implying.
Sure.
That's what I want to do because my parents are incredible and I want them to know, especially at the end of their lives, how much they meant to us. And
Yeah.
if that means ensuring in every single possible way that they're not in some home somewhere, but rather with their family and
Sure.
with their kids, that's what I want. But in your example, it might look differently.
And
Yeah,
that,
I'm
and
just
that's
curious,
and
like-
that's I think an important component because I do think there is an obligation, right?
Yeah.
I think you're right, Matt, in pointing out people have inherent value and we have to recognize that regardless of what they've done. And that's hard to say because there are some really evil people out there.
Yeah.
Right. However, how we interact with them, right, is going to change based on multiple things, right?
Yeah.
As a parent, I have family members who, their actions have hurt my kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, okay, if I continue to let you interact with my kids, that's going to continue to cause harm with them, right? or that's going to continue to cause like emotional pain that they don't necessarily need, right?
Yeah.
And so how do I and this is something like, you know, something I've wrestled with is how do I in a loving way, right, still meet my responsibility in being a good you know, a good, I'll just say like family member, right? Be a good family member and take care of my family, my extended family, but then also at the same time protect my immediate family, which is my absolute responsibility. Like at the end of the day, my wife and kids come before
Everybody
my
else.
parents, my brother, my sister, you know, all of those people. My kids and my wife come like I need to, I have
Protect
to
to and
protect
look after them
right?
first. Yeah.
And so I think
Give
that
them the priority.
I think that the idea of taking care of the elderly really has a lot of different shades of gray in it. And it's really about also capability, right? Because if you
Yeah.
think about it, if you're not in a
My wife's a
financial
CNA.
right,
Well, she's an RN.
well,
Actually, she's
but-
a nurse.
okay, but
Well,
let
he's
me-
going
let me-
like
so-
financially.
Financially,
are you
yeah,
capable
yeah.
of taking care of two people?
Well, I was thinking
Who's
even
the one person-
capability of, do you have the capability medically to take
do
care of
you have
someone?
the skills, right? Like,
That's
and
very
there are
different.
people, right? And so and there are some times where it is actually better, even for that person who doesn't want to go into a home. They're actually
Well,
better
there's-
off,
oh, yeah.
right? Like
And
going.
by the
into
way,
that.
I wasn't saying there weren't extenuating circumstances.
no, I know
by the
you
way.
weren't.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's why I think it's really important for us to define.
I think it
what
was
we
good
mean.
for you to add that though, because again, like, I mean, I'm sorry, my grandpa and my grandma, when they moved out here,
Yeah.
and they were in a home because my grandma had a lot of she had dementia, memory issues, and you can't, like, there was no way we were going to be able to take care of that.
No.
And then there were physical things with my grandpa that my mom and dad could not handle.
Yes.
That's an extenuating circumstance. That's not like, hey, I threw my parents in a home because I got tired of them. You know,
Sure.
I didn't want to deal with them. Like that, those are obviously different things. I
Sure.
guess my point is, but are like in that realm, aren't you showing value for someone?
Yes.
You
Yeah. I
are
would
valuing them.
absolutely agree.
And so that's and that's what I was kind of going for, but I don't think I explained my answer very well. And to be honest, when you first said that, I thought that was your opinion. I was like, dang, dude, that was cold.
I like to.
It
Well,
made a little more sense once
when
you
you guys say stuff, I'm like,
clarified the
well, I
question.
can kind of see a lot of different paths that go through here, right? Like, and so that's kind of why I wanted to ask, because I'm.
No, it was a great
when we-
question.
When we talk about it, was I think it's the thing that triggered it is because the way you phrased like valuing history. I'm like, value comes across different people differently.
Yeah.
Like you said, like
Well, and
we
again-
all have intrinsic values, human beings, right? But like
Yeah.
even that sentence alone, I was like, I can break down somebody's economic value in a minute.
Mm.
My economic, like that's why I have a salary. Somebody broke down my economic value, and that's what they determined it was.
Yeah.
So like there are other ways, there are different gradations
Yeah.
or categories of value. So it's when we're talking about relations to people, and especially since we were talking about responsibilities as men,
Yeah.
that changes things, right? Like, do I have to value you and like you and love you? Because that's what it means to some people, right? Do I have to have you nearby? No. But I do have to make sure that your affairs are taken care of somehow.
Sure.
Like, right? That is a man taking care of the
Yes.
responsibility thing. I don't have to love you in that moment in the sense of like the lovey-dovey feels, and I don't have to like you in that moment either.
yeah.
But if I have the capability to provide
Yeah.
adequate resources for you, then sure.
Yeah.
But there are also different tiers, right?
And
Like,
that's
you've
why,
got-
No, I
and that's
get it,
why
I
I
get
think,
it.
but taking care of can look differently, right?
Yeah.
I think the other piece of it is, and I think it should be noted that a lot of this stuff ends up being for yourself, because at the end of the day, you get to look yourself in the mirror and go, I spent my entire life being bitter towards this person, and
Yep.
now they're gone.
Yep.
Right? I love the saying, right? Bitterness is a poison that you take,
Yep.
hoping someone else will die.
Yep.
Mhm.
You know, and
I never heard that. That's awesome.
You
haven't
never heard that? That was
No.
what I referenced to you. Bitterness is it's like
Oh,
a
you
poison.
started, then I cut you off
Yeah.
like a rude
Yeah,
person.
no,
I know.
that's okay, don't worry.
I
It
love
wasn't
that.
rude. It was a
Tim
good
didn't tell me I was
conversation.
cutting people off. He,
I'm sorry, I'm slacking. But anyway, I've seen it firsthand, and so you know, at the end of the day, the idea of doing something good for someone else, yes, it is good for them, but it's also good for you.
Mhm.
Right.
Yep.
And so when you decide, I'm not going to take care of this person because they did this, they did this, they did this, I hate them, they're a piece of garbage, and all of those things, like they may be a piece of garbage, they
Mhm.
may be a horrible person. However, if you have the capability to do some of the things that they need, and you have the capability and capacity, right? Both of those things I think are really important, but there are certain things you can do regardless, right? you can make a phone call.
Mhm.
You can, you know, decide to forgive somebody. You can't, and I would argue that that is part of taking care of things.
Yep.
That is part of taking care of somebody.
Yep.
You
Yeah.
don't have to give them like complete absolution, right?
Mhm.
But
No.
but I would say like you can go and listen to them,
Yes.
right? You can go and give them the opportunity to apologize or whatever. I think that there's, like I said, there's so many gradations of taking care of. And I think that when we tend to think of taking care of our elderly, it's, oh, I'm building my parents a home, right?
It's a little
Or-
over the top for some people.
No, but I mean, I think that's great. I think that's a sign of a good, healthy relationship.
Yep.
Mhm.
Right.
Yep.
But not everybody has that.
Nope.
And so like you think about it, it's like, okay, well, what does it look like for me in my circumstances? Right. So there's not a cut and dry answer.
No,
either.
I like
Yeah.
that a lot. I think one thing, because we've mentioned this on other conversations, right? Like, I can't remember the phrasing of it, but the way I phrase it is like your intent or the heart behind your actions, right? Like, you can take actions and for selfish reasons, and you can take the exact same action for very selfless reasons.
Right.
And usually only you know the reasons why. I think it's interesting that a couple of those cultures, I think it was China or Japan, they mentioned honor, right? Is that
Yeah.
one of those?
Yep.
I
Nobility.
know that's not exactly how they mean it, but I do think that is an element that men are specifically drawn to. We like characters and historical figures
Mhm.
and men who possess the sense of character about them, of like integrity, where they are making decisions. They might be hard decisions, but they are not making them for themselves. They are making them because it's the right decision to
Mhm.
do for like whatever it is that their responsibility is for, right? And so
I think
I think that's an interesting way of looking at that discussion. Is not necessarily like who do you value, but like do you have the honor to do what should be done, and then figure out the healthiest way to do it, take care of everybody,
Yeah.
Ooh, that's
which
good.
And
might look different in different scenarios.
Yeah.
I like what you said there because it kind of went with there's a quote, and it's from Aristotle.
Yeah.
Of course, it has to be
Of
from
course.
Aristotle. And it's from Nicomachean Ethics, and he was talking about what is like true goodness, and he defines it as rational acts in accordance, or rational acts of the soul in accordance with perfect virtue.
Yeah.
And when I think that's why, like when you say, well, why wouldn't you? Like my brain goes straight to that. I'm like, what is the rational act in accordance with perfect virtue when it comes to that sort of scenario? Is it to just let someone, yeah, I'm apathetic towards you, bye, see ya, I'm not gonna see you again. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Or is it to some sort of absolution, some sort of ending, some sort of one last paying of respect? You know what I mean? I don't
Yeah.
know whatever it is, whatever care would be in that moment. I think that idea, those good things that nourish the soul,
Yeah.
come from good decisions. And if you are going to be bitter towards people in your life, whether they deserve it or not, if you're willing
Yeah.
to let go of that, that is a rational act in accordance with perfect virtue, in my opinion.
Well, and the philosophers, those philosophers really talk about happiness and virtue being inextricably linked,
Yes.
right? Like,
Yep.
like happiness comes through virtuous living.
And justice.
And
Justice
justice.
is a big part
Yeah,
of
yeah,
it.
absolutely. But I think our idea of happiness is self-indulgence,
Oh, yeah. Oh,
right? And
yeah.
so that's part of
that's a
part
whole
of-
nother episode.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that's part of it. Is it's like we don't view on like we recognize that honor is amazing, but we don't pursue that because well
Well, it's
that's not what
hard.
happiness is, right? Happiness is I get my cake and I get to have my soda and I get to do all
And
the
my
fun
women
things,
and my
everything, right?
car
and-
and my video games.
Yeah, and so I think it's important to like think about that from that perspective too, because if you're talking about your lifespan, right? What's good for you in the moment isn't always good for you long term. And
Yeah.
when you're talking about like living virtuously, that looks at the long term effects on your life, right? And that's where the happiness comes from
Mhm.
because you're forsaking the immediate gratification for something long term that's going to be even better.
Yeah.
Right.
So this is for you, Mike, because I know we're kind of getting to the
Oh,
end of
wrong
the
camera.
episode here.
Sorry, Tim.
Practical application for this. I immediately started going through and thinking about what things do I need to prep my son for before he hits that first milestone. When he gets, I'm thinking 12, 16, 18,
Sure.
those three. And I'm trying to think to myself, what things do I need to start equipping him with? And I feel like I've already been doing it almost because it was done for me. Right. And so I've been doing what my dad did with me, with my son, and trying to be a bit more intentional with it. And what's cool is I have my dad to talk to, and I have other good men, and it's nice to be able to have that. And so I'm trying to come up with some little things to equip them with, that idea of responsibility and how that's connected to freedom and rights. And real men want freedom, right? We love freedom, men do, but freedom doesn't come without responsibility. Responsibility and freedom come hand in hand. So those men out there who think that freedom means not having a wife, I think you're missing out, man. You're missing out on something that actually is a true part of freedom and a true part that comes with that true responsibility of being a man, or entering into manhood and taking care of somebody else. I think that's kind of interesting that we were talking about that, but he's got sisters, right? My son does. And so my immediate thought was, how can you better take care of your sisters?
Sure.
I want to put that responsibility on you to an extent. How better can you take care of your mother?
Yeah.
What different ways? Any thoughts, guys? Any other final thoughts? Any other comments?
I think something you said there kind of just, because you asked earlier about like, well, what are some milestones? Like, what would we set some milestones as? And it's interesting, like the idea of giving them more responsibility.
Yes.
Right. And I think that as I'm still learning to be a dad, trying to figure out what like, I think that responsibility you have to hand off. You need to go, and I think that's part of what helps develop young men into manhood, is because if you think about it, adulthood is incredibly weighty. All of a sudden, like, think about it from a criminal perspective, right? You cross into 18, now you're tried as an adult.
Yep.
Now everything you do, I literally had to have this conversation with my brother. So I'm the oldest, and my brother is a year and a half younger than me. He is, I mean, same height, but incredibly jacked. And
you're not.
Dude. Anyway.
Yeah, he's a big guy.
He is a big dude. And coming out of high school, I had to have a conversation with him because, he was 18 and he would get in fights, like random fights. Like, I remember we were hanging out one night and at my buddy's house, and he's like, I'm gonna go get some McDonald's. And he comes back and his knuckles are all bloody. And I was like, hey dude, what happened? And he's like, some dude called me gay. And so like my point though, like I ended up sitting him down and going, dude, you can't act like this, because number one, you live in a town with a whole lot of military guys, and you live in a town that has some special operations guys here, and you don't know if you're gonna, you go up against them, that's not gonna end well. That's number one. But number two, you do something now, you're an adult. That is long-term repercussions. When you're a kid, you have some grace. When you're an adult, you don't. So the idea of handing off responsibility to young men, and sooner rather than later,
yes,
right? Because you think about handing off responsibility. Well, what are you going to do? You're going to prepare them for that responsibility. Well, you're not going to go, hey, by the way, here's this big thing to go do.
Yep. Well, on that whole, the notion
go ahead,
of
because I was go ahead, but I had something to add to that, because I thought that was a great point.
On the notion of like the big thing, right? Like I tell our kids, like, the biggest way I phrase things is like, you want to learn lessons while they're cheap.
Yep.
Younger you are, the cheaper they usually are.
Yep.
Same thing goes with how I'm teaching them, right? Like, if I'm going to teach somebody responsibility, I'm not going to be like, here's a $50,000 car, have at it, right? Like, no, I'm going to start you off with something small. Can you take care of like a $100 bike? Can you do that? Can you maintain that? Cool. Awesome. If you couldn't, it was $100. It was a cheap lesson. So I do think it's important that as people are handing off skills and things like that, don't put them in this position where if they fail, they're in an unrecoverable situation.
Yeah.
Yep.
Put them in a position where if they fail, they're going to feel it, right? But you want them to be able to learn the lesson as cheaply as possible, but where it's still costly enough to where they learn the lesson.
And I want us to hang on to that, because I think we could talk an entire episode about that, because by the way, when we were talking about milestones, the first milestone that came to my head that I forgot to even say this, but the first one I wrote down was taking out the trash, and the second one was mowing the lawn.
Interesting.
I immediately thought of that, and it's not just, it was my experience. The oldest brother got to do the lawn mowing, and then I was the middle. I had to take out the trash and do the recyclables, and Mark had to do the trash in all the bathrooms, bring that down. And it was like each of us had these little, but then when Brian got to a certain age, all of a sudden I took over the lawn mowing.
Yeah.
And Mark was taking out the trash.
Yeah.
And then Bethany was helping out do the little trash from the things. But, then, when we got older, though, we got bigger responsibilities. And it just started with the chores even, right? And then it became, well, Matt, you drove the car. You have to clean the car this weekend too. Responsibility, bit by bit by bit. And I started realizing that just how my parents did that with just chores.
Sure.
And how much that still sinks in with me. This idea of, it was almost cool that you got to go up from trash to lawn. Like, Mark, you take the trash out now. I get to go mow the lawn.
That's some brilliant marketing
and
right there.
I know, right? It was
Feels
like
very
cool.
corporate,
Like,
you know, you take the intro level job and then slowly you
yes,
work your way up.
I'm teaching
middle
him. Yeah.
management.
He's
Yeah.
middle management now. But my son Declan is mowing the lawn now. He wanted extra money this week. He's saving up to buy the DVD set of the Star Wars Bad Batch series or whatever it is. He's dying to get it. And so for the past month, he's been doing extra jobs around the house. We said, if you do extra jobs, we'll give you a buck or two here or whatever. And so he's been saving his allowance. And now tonight he did lawn mowing. He did something else. He wanted to unload the dishwasher, but I already did it. And he was like, Dad, he was so mad. But that idea of, again, responsibility with money, responsibility with those little bits in life. And it's like, what else can we do to start handing off that responsibility to our kids? By the way, I have one, but I don't want to spoil it because it's coming around Christmas time, and I'll share it with you guys when it comes there.
Cool.
Hey, any final thoughts, guys?
No, I think while we didn't settle on milestones, I do think this idea, at least what my takeaway from this is a process.
Yep.
And we need to be handing off that responsibility.
We
to
do.
our kids, right? Like that's how we develop them into young men, and that will translate into manhood.
Yeah. Hey guys, thank you so much for joining us. We hope you guys enjoyed this conversation. We thoroughly did. I'm sitting here thinking we could easily go into another conversation now about milestones, like actual milestones, and specific application for this, which Mike would love. And I think that would be another great conversation. But I think indulgence in men and how we face that could be another good topic.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Anyways, thank you guys for joining us. Hope you guys enjoyed another episode of Beyond the Beard. We'll see you in the next one. And
so you guys, journey well.
Journey well.
When this silent, you'll be alone, far from friends in life. You'll spend your evenings getting stoned to